One wrong number usually just gets you a bad grade or a reprimand from a manager. But in the dimly lit back rooms of Chicago's underworld, a calculation error doesn't just cost money. It costs blood. Jacob Vesper, the ruthless head of the Vesper Syndicate, didn't make mistakes. He was a man who viewed the world as a cold equation of assets and liabilities. So, when a trembling waitress named Eleanor leaned over his table and whispered that his math was wrong, the entire room held its breath. Everyone expected a gunshot. Instead, she was escorted to his office. What happened next wasn't an execution, but the beginning of the most dangerous game the city had ever seen. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside the Onyx Lounge, however, the weather was irrelevant. The air here was climate-controlled to a crisp 68 degrees and smelled of aged mahogany, cigar smoke, and fear. This wasn't a place for the public. You didn't walk into the Onyx off the street. You were invited, or you were summoned. Elena Davis was neither. She was invisible. Clad in the generic black vest and white button-down of the service staff, Elena moved through the shadows of the VIP section with the practiced efficiency of someone trying to disappear. At 24, her life was a series of closed doors, a dropout from MIT's theoretical mathematics program, not because she lacked the genius, but because her father's gambling debts had drained her tuition fund and put a target on their backs. She now balanced trays of crystal tumblers instead of balancing complex equations. Table 4 needs a refill on the scotch. The 1968 Macallan. The floor manager, a nervous man named Rick, hissed into her ear. And for God's sake, don't look him in the eye. You know the rules. Elena nodded, her grip tightening on the silver tray. She knew who was at table 4. Everyone in Chicago knew. Jacob Vesper. The head of the Vesper Syndicate was a ghost story told in police precincts and rival gang hideouts alike. At 32, he had consolidated power faster than any Don in history, mostly because he didn't operate on passion. He operated on logic, cold, brutal logic. As Eleanor approached the secluded booth in the back corner, the ambient noise of the club seemed to die away, sucked into the vacuum of Jacob's presence. He was flanked by 2 men, Marco, a mountain of muscle in a cheap suit, and Silas, a wiry man with cold eyes. But Jacob was different. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Elena would make in 5 years. He was leaning over the table, his dark hair falling slightly over his forehead, a fountain pen in his hand. He was writing furiously on a linen napkin, sketching out a grid of numbers. Elena placed the scotch down with the softness of a feather. She meant to retreat immediately, to fade back into the wallpaper. But then she saw it. The napkin. Jacob was calculating a risk assessment for a distribution route. She could see the variables, 3 distinct shipping lanes, the probability of police interception, denoted by a crude variable p, and the projected loss margin. He was running a linear probability model. He wrote, 12 midward 0.85, your 14.0 mess a baseline requirement. Elena froze. The tray trembled in her hand. It was a visceral reaction, a physical itch in her brain that she couldn't scratch. The math was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but fundamentally flawed. He was treating the interception events as independent variables, but given the layout of Chicago's Port Authority shifts, they were dependent. Jacob paused. He didn't look up, but he sensed the hesitation. His hand stopped moving. Is there a problem? His voice was a low baritone, smooth like gravel in a silk bag. Marco shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Walk away, her brain screamed. He's a killer. You are nobody. But the mathematician in her, the part of her that sought order in chaos, couldn't let it stand. It was like seeing a painting hung crooked. "You're assuming the harbor patrols are independent events," Elena whispered. Her voice was barely audible. The silence that followed was deafening. Silas looked at her as if she had just pulled the pin on a grenade. Jacob slowly capped his pen. He turned his head, his ice-blue eyes locking onto hers. They were terrifyingly intelligent. "Excuse me?" Jacob asked, his tone dangerously polite. Elena swallowed hard, her throat dry. "The calculation. You're dividing by 0.85 to account for a 15% risk. But if lane A is compromised, the probability of lane B being compromised rises to 40% because the patrols coordinate. The variables are dependent. Your baseline isn't 14.1 million. She took a shaky breath, realizing she might die in the next 30 seconds. "It's 16.8 million. If you move that shipment with these numbers, you're going to lose everything." Marco stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Boss, you want me to take this trash out?" Jacob held up a hand. He didn't break eye contact with Eleanor. He looked at her, not as a waitress, but as a specimen under a microscope. He looked down at the napkin, then back at her. He did a quick mental calculation, his eyes narrowing. "Dependent variables," he muttered to himself. He scratched out the previous line and scribbled a new equation. He stared at the result. 16.8. The air in the booth grew heavy. Jacob slowly placed the pen down on the table. "What is your name?" "Elena," she squeaked. "Elena Davis." Jacob picked up his glass of scotch, swirled it, and took a sip. "Elena, leave the tray. Marco, escort Miss Davis to my office upstairs." Elena's blood ran cold. "Sir, I really need this job. I'm sorry, I didn't ask you to apologize," Jacob said, turning back to his men. "I asked you to go to my office." Marco grabbed her upper arm. His grip was iron. "Let's go, Einstein." As she was dragged through the club, past the staring eyes of the other patrons and the horrified look of her manager, Elena didn't feel the floor beneath her feet. She only felt the burning gaze of Jacob Vesper on her back. She had corrected the devil, and now she was going to have to pay the price. The office of Jacob Vesper was a study in minimalism and power. Located on the top floor of the Onyx building, it featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, a city of lights that Jacob held in the palm of his hand. Elena sat on the edge of a leather chair that was likely worth more than her father's life insurance policy. Her hands were folded in her lap to hide their shaking. She had been waiting for 20 minutes. The door clicked open. Elena flinched. Jacob walked in, shedding his suit jacket and tossing it onto a couch. He loosened his tie, the casual action making him seem even more dangerous, not less. He didn't look at her immediately. He walked to a sideboard, poured a glass of water, and finally turned. "Who sent you?" he asked. The question was a bullet. "What?" Elena blinked. "The Moretti family. The FBI. Who sent you?" He walked toward the desk and leaned against the front of it, crossing his arms. "Waitresses at the Onyx don't know conditional probability. They don't know how to spot a logistical flaw in a narcotics distribution model in under 10 seconds. It wasn't narcotics," Elena stammered, her mind racing. "It was just numbers. I see numbers. That's just how my brain works." "You see numbers." Jacob's eyes bored into her. "Who are you?" "I'm nobody. I was a student. MIT. Mathematics and statistical analysis." Jacob's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "MIT. And now you're serving drinks to degenerates. Why?" Elena looked down at her scuffed black shoes. "My father. He has a gambling problem. He borrowed money from the wrong people. I had to drop out to work. to help him pay the interest. Jacob walked around the desk and sat in his high-backed chair. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file. To Elena's horror, she realized he had probably had her background checked in the 20 minutes she had been sitting there. Thomas Davis, Jacob read from a tablet screen, owes 40,000 to the South Side Kings, a low-level street gang, violent but stupid. Please, Elena whispered, don't hurt him. I won't say anything about what I saw on the napkin, I swear. Jacob let out a short, dry laugh. Elena, if I wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't be sitting in a Herman Miller chair. You'd be in the trunk of a car. He stood up and walked over to a massive whiteboard covered in a retractable screen. He pushed a button and the screen retracted, revealing a chaotic mess of equations, timelines, and financial projections. I have an accountant, Jacob said, gesturing to the board. He's Harvard-educated. He's been with the family for 10 years, and he missed the dependency variable you spotted in 10 seconds. He turned to her, his expression intense. My business is expanding. We are moving into legitimate sectors, tech, shipping, real estate. The numbers are getting too big for napkin math. I am surrounded by men who know how to break legs, Elena. I need someone who knows how to break codes. Elena stared at the whiteboard. Even from here, she could see errors, inefficiencies in the laundering cycle, redundancies in the payroll. It was a mess. What are you saying? I'm offering you a job, Jacob said. You will be my personal auditor. You will go through every ledger, every deal, every projection. You find the leaks. You find the mistakes before they cost me money. I can't work for the Mafia, Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. I'm not a criminal. Jacob smiled, and for the first time, it didn't look entirely predatory. It looked challenged. You're already a criminal, Elena. You just don't know it yet. You're working off an illegal debt for a father who will never stop gambling. You're drowning. He walked closer to her, invading her personal space. She could smell sandalwood and rain. Here is the offer, Jacob said softly. You work for me. Solely for me. I buy your father's debt from the South Side Kings this evening. It vanishes. I pay you a salary of 10,000 a month. You finish your degree online. Elena's mouth fell open. 10,000. In exchange, Jacob's voice dropped an octave, becoming steel again. You belong to the Vesper Syndicate. You see everything. You hear everything. And you never, ever repeat a word of it. If you try to leave, or if you betray me, the debt returns, and it will be collected in blood. He extended a hand. It was large, calloused, and steady. Do we have a deal, Elena? Elena looked at his hand, then at the whiteboard filled with chaotic numbers that begged to be solved. She thought of her father, terrified every time the phone rang. She thought of the crushing weight of her own wasted potential. She stood up. Her legs were still trembling, but her chin went up. I need access to the raw data, she said, her voice gaining a strange strength. No redacted ledgers. If I'm going to fix your probability models, I need to know the real variables, all of them. Jacob's eyes gleamed with something that looked dangerously like respect. You'll have the keys to the kingdom, he promised. Elena reached out and took his hand. His grip engulfed hers, warm and electric. It felt like a pact with the devil, but for the first time in years, Elena didn't feel helpless. Then I'm in, she said. Jacob held her hand a second longer than necessary. Good. Start with the whiteboard. You have an hour before the shipment leaves. If you were right about the 16.8 million, you just saved my life. As Eleanor walked toward the whiteboard, picking up a marker, she felt Jacob watching her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the most dangerous asset in the room. The transition from the sticky floors of the onyx lounge to the plush, silent world of Jacob's inner circle was jarring. For the next 2 weeks, Eleanor lived in a blur of spreadsheets and encrypted hard drives. Jacob had been true to his word. He had set her up in a private office adjacent to his, a glass-walled enclosure that allowed him to see her at all times, and her to see him. She learned quickly that the Vesper Syndicate wasn't just a gang, it was a corporation. A corporation that dealt in death and vice, yes, but a corporation nonetheless. She also learned that Jacob Vesper was a workaholic. He was the first one in the building and the last to leave. He didn't drink to excess, he didn't bring women back to the office, and he treated his business with a terrifying seriousness. One Tuesday evening, the rain was lashing against the windows again. It was 11 p.m. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the servers and the scratch of Elena's stylus on her tablet. She was deep into the sanitation contracts, a front for moving cash through city services. Something wasn't adding up. There was a recurring discrepancy. Small amounts, fractional percentages, siphoned off every Friday at 4 p.m. It was what coders called a salami slicing attack. Someone was stealing from Jacob, pennies at a time, but over 5 years, it amounted to nearly $3 million. Elena felt a cold sweat prickle her neck. She checked the authorization codes. The digital signature attached to the transfers belonged to a user named Canis. She looked up. Through the glass wall, she saw Jacob in his office. He was in a heated discussion with his underboss, Silas. Silas, the wiry man with the cold eyes. Elena pulled up the personnel files Jacob had given her access to. She cross-referenced Silas's start date with the beginning of the theft. They matched perfectly. She felt sick. Silas was Jacob's right hand. He was the one who handled the dirty work. If she accused him, and she was wrong, Silas would kill her. If she didn't tell Jacob, and he found out she missed it, Jacob would kill her. Suddenly, the door to her glass office opened. Elena jumped, nearly dropping her tablet. It was Jacob. He looked exhausted. He had removed his tie and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt, revealing the column of his throat. He held 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of amber liquid. "You've been staring at that screen for 6 hours," Jacob said, his voice softer than usual. "Drink." He placed a glass on her desk. "I don't drink on the job," Elena said automatically. "You're not hourly anymore, Elena. You're salaried. Drink." She took the glass. The whiskey burned pleasantly on the way down. Jacob sat on the edge of her desk, his long legs stretched out. It was an intimate gesture that made the air in the small room feel thin. "You've reorganized the Cayman accounts," he noted. "My liquidity is up 12%. It was an inefficiency in the currency exchange timing," she said, looking at her hands. "Simple math." "To you, maybe." He studied her. "You're different from the others, Elena. You don't fear me." "I'm terrified of you," she corrected, looking him in the eye. "No," Jacob shook his head slowly. "You're terrified of the situation, but you don't fear me. You challenge me. Last week, you told me my acquisition strategy for the dockyards was statistically moronic." Elena blushed. "It was. You were over-leveraging." Jacob chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "No one has spoken to me like that in a decade." He leaned closer. His face was inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. The tension in the room shifted from professional to something electric, something dangerous. "What did you find tonight?" he asked softly. "I saw your face go pale 5 minutes ago. Who is it?" Elena's heart stopped. He was too observant. I'm not sure yet," she lied. Jacob reached out, his hand cupping her chin, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. The touch was shocking, scorching. "Do not lie to me, Elena. I told you. We deal in truth here. Everyone else lies to me. My enemies, my politicians, even my family. You are the variable that doesn't lie. That is why you are here." Elena trembled. The warmth of his hand was intoxicating, but the danger was real. She turned her tablet around and pushed it toward him. "Look at the Friday transfers," she whispered. "Authorization code Canis." Jacob looked at the screen. He scrolled through the data. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by a glacial void. "Canis," he said. The word sounded like a curse. Latin for dog. He looked up at the glass wall, toward the outer office where Silas had just left. "Silas," Jacob said, his voice devoid of emotion. "It might be a mistake," Elena said quickly, terrified of what she had just set in motion. "Maybe his password was stolen, maybe—" "Silas handles the cybersecurity," Jacob said. "No one steals his password." Jacob stood up. The intimacy of the moment before was gone, replaced by the terrifying aura of the boss. He walked to the door, then stopped. He turned back to Elena. "Pack your things," he ordered. "Am I fired?" "No," Jacob said. "But you can't stay here. If Silas knows you found this, you're a liability to him, and he cleans up his liabilities." "Where am I going?" Panic rose in her chest. Jacob walked back to her, grabbing her hand and pulling her to her feet. He pulled her close, his body hard against hers. It was a protective stance, shielding her from the door. "You're coming with me," he said, "to my private residence. Until I handle this, you don't leave my sight. Not for a second." "Jacob, do the math, Elena," he cut her off, his eyes blazing. "The probability of you surviving the night alone in your apartment is 0. The probability of you surviving with me is significantly higher." He pulled a gun from his waistband, a sleek, black pistol, and checked the chamber. "Now, let's go." As they exited the office, Elena realized she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just his auditor anymore. She was his witness. And in the world of the Vesper Syndicate, witnesses usually didn't last long, unless they were under the direct protection of the devil himself. The drive to Jacob's private residence was a blur of wet asphalt and neon lights smearing across the rain-slicked windows of the armored Mercedes S-Class. Marco drove with white-knuckled precision, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every 3 seconds. Elena sat in the back, pressed against the leather door, as far from Jacob as the confined space would allow. But his presence was overwhelming. He was radiating a cold, controlled fury. He was on his phone, typing rapid-fire encrypted messages, mobilizing an army she couldn't see. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, her voice small in the heavy silence. "The Spire," Jacob said without looking up. "My penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. It's the only place in the city with independent power and hard-wired servers that aren't on the main grid." Is he really going to try to kill you? Over money?" Jacob finally looked at her. The streetlights cast rhythmic shadows across his sharp features. "It's not just money, Elena. In this world, money is loyalty. If he's stealing that much, he's building a war chest. He's not planning to retire. He's planning to replace me." He paused, his eyes softening slightly as he saw her trembling. "You found the loose thread that unravels his entire tapestry. That makes you the most dangerous person in Chicago right now." They arrived at the Spire, a needle of glass piercing the stormy sky. They bypassed the lobby, taking a private freight elevator directly to the 60th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a fortress disguised as a home. It was stark, modern, and filled with art that looked like it belonged in a museum. Bleak, abstract pieces that reflected Jacob's soul. "Don't touch the windows," Jacob warned as he threw his keys on a marble island. "They are pressure sensitive. Marco, stand guard at the elevator. No one comes up unless I authorize it. Not even family." Marco nodded, pulling a submachine gun from under his jacket before the elevator doors closed. Elena stood in the middle of the massive living room, feeling utterly out of place in her cheap waitress uniform. Jacob moved to a hidden panel in the wall, sliding it back to reveal a bank of monitors and a high-end server rack. "Come here," he commanded. Elena approached. "This is the master ledger, the raw feed. If Silas is moving the money, he's doing it through the shell core." Jacob typed a password, his fingers moving like a pianist's. "I need to know where the money is going. If I know who he's paying, I know who his allies are." Elena sat in the ergonomic chair. She took a deep breath, cracking her knuckles. This was her domain. The guns and the threats were terrifying. But numbers. Numbers she could control. "I need to run a Benford's Law analysis on the vendor payments," she muttered, mostly to herself. "If the leading digits don't follow a logarithmic distribution, the invoices are fake." She began to type. Her fear evaporated, replaced by the hyper-focus of the savant. Jacob stood behind her, watching the screen. He watched her mind work, fascinated. She wasn't just looking for errors, she was seeing the matrix of his empire. 30 minutes passed in silence, save for the clicking of keys and the hum of the cooling fans. "Got it," Elena whispered. Jacob leaned over her shoulder, one hand resting on the back of her chair, his chest brushing her shoulder. The contact sent a jolt through her, but she pointed at the screen. "Here, these 3 companies, Apex Logistics, Red River Holdings, and Gemini Consulting. Their invoices are perfectly randomized, too perfect. Humans are bad at generating random numbers. We avoid patterns so much we create anti-patterns. These were generated by an algorithm." "Trace the routing numbers," Jacob said, his breath hot on her ear. "I am. They all funnel into a single offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But look at the beneficiary." She hit a final key. The screen decrypted the account holder's name. Moretti Enterprises. Jacob straightened up as if he'd been burned. He walked to the window, staring out at the dark waters of Lake Michigan. "The Morettis?" he said, his voice deadly quiet. "My rivals. Silas isn't just stealing. He's funding their invasion. He's paying them to wipe me out so he can take the throne as their puppet." He turned back to Eleanor. The look on his face was terrifying, a mix of betrayal and lethal resolve. "You realize what you've done, Eleanor?" I exposed him. You just started a war." Before Eleanor could respond, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The hum of the servers cut out. The room was plunged into pitch blackness, save for the ambient glow of the city below. "Jacob!" Elena whimpered. "Get down!" Jacob roared. He tackled her. They hit the floor hard, Jacob's heavy body covering hers, shielding her. A split second later, the bulletproof glass of the balcony window spiderwebbed with a deafening crack, followed by the distinct sound of high-caliber sniper fire impacting the reinforced pane. They were under siege. "Stay down," Jacob hissed into her ear. He was heavy, solid, and smelled of adrenaline and expensive cologne. "The glass is rated for 50 caliber, but it won't hold forever." "They found us," Elena gasped, pressed against the cold hardwood floor. "How did they find us? You said this place was off the grid." "Silas," Jacob growled, rolling off her but keeping a hand on her back to keep her low. He crawled toward the kitchen island, reaching for a hidden compartment under the marble counter. He pulled out a customized assault rifle and a fresh magazine. "He knows my protocols. He knew I'd come here." Another shot slammed into the glass, creating a second spiderweb pattern. The integrity of the window was failing. "We have to move," Jacob said. "The elevator is a kill box. Marco is likely already dead or compromised." "Marco?" Elena felt tears prick her eyes. The big man had been terrifying, but he had been their protector. "Focus, Elena!" Jacob grabbed her face in his hands. In the darkness, his eyes were fierce. "I need your brain, not your fear. My security system is hardwired. If Silas cut the power, he bypassed the biometrics. That means the stairwells are locked down magnetically. We are trapped in a glass cage." Elena forced herself to breathe. Panic is a variable that guarantees failure. She closed her eyes for a second, visualizing the building schematics she had seen on the server earlier. "The fire suppression system," she said, her eyes snapping open. "It's a mechanical override, right? Required by city code?" "Yes, but it just sprays water. It doesn't unlock the doors." "No," Elena said, her mind racing. "But the pressure release valves for the halon gas system in the server room. They vent to the exterior maintenance shaft. The vents are large enough for a person." Jacob looked at her, a slow grin spreading across his face in the dark. "You want us to crawl down a 60-story ventilation shaft in the middle of a storm?" "Do you have a better statistical probability of survival?" she countered. "Touché." Jacob grabbed her hand. "Run." They sprinted, crouched low, toward the server room. Behind them, the main window finally shattered, raining safety glass onto the floor. The wind howled into the apartment, carrying rain and the sound of a distant helicopter. They burst into the server room. Jacob used the butt of his rifle to smash the casing of the emergency vent release. He yanked the lever. A hiss of pressurized gas filled the air, and a heavy steel grate popped open near the floor. "Ladies first," Jacob said, checking the door behind them. Elena scrambled into the dark metal tunnel. It was tight, smelling of dust and ozone. She crawled, the metal biting into her knees. Jacob followed, pulling the grate closed behind them, just as the door to the server room was kicked open. They could hear voices muffled through the vent. "Clear left, clear right. Boss wants the girl alive. She's the one with the codes." Elena froze. "They want me." "Keep moving," Jacob whispered from behind her. "I won't let them take you." They shimmied down the vertical maintenance ladder, sliding down 10 floors in darkness until they reached the mechanical level. They exited into a noisy, hot room filled with HVAC units. Jacob checked his watch. "We need a car, but my garage will be swarming with Moretti soldiers." "The subway," Elena said, pointing to a service map on the wall. "The building's foundation connects to the old freight tunnels that run under the loop. If we can get to the sub-basement, we can pop out 3 blocks away." "You memorized the city infrastructure maps?" "I was bored on my breaks." She shrugged. They moved through the bowels of the building. The air grew colder and damper. Jacob moved with the grace of a predator, clearing corners with his weapon raised. Elena stuck to his back, mirroring his movements. They reached the heavy iron door leading to the freight tunnels. Jacob shoved it open. The tunnel was dimly lit by flickering yellow bulbs. It smelled of sewage and old, rusted steel. "We need to get to the west side," Jacob said, his voice echoing slightly. "I have a safe house there that Silas doesn't know about. It was my father's." "Jacob," Elena stopped. He turned. "What?" "The math," she said, her voice trembling. "The timing. Silas struck exactly 2 hours after I found the discrepancy. He authorized the transfer to the Morettis at 9 p.m., but the bank verification takes 4 hours. So the money hasn't cleared yet," Elena said, her eyes widening. "It's stuck in the Swift clearinghouse queue. If we can get to a terminal with level 5 access, I can cancel the transfer. I can freeze his war chest." "If we do that," Jacob said, stepping closer to her, "Silas is bankrupt. The Morettis will kill him for promising payment he can't deliver. The problem solves itself. But we need a terminal, Elena said, and the spire is burned. Jacob looked down the tunnel. There is one place, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. They lease server space to the major syndicates for off-book storage. It's neutral ground. You want to break into the Federal Reserve? Elena asked, incredulous. I have a key, Jacob said, pulling a heavy black titanium card from his pocket. But getting there, that's the problem. We are on foot, and every hitman in the city has my face on their phone. Suddenly, the sound of an engine roared down the tunnel. Headlights blinded them. Jacob shoved Elena behind a concrete pillar and raised his rifle. The car, a beat-up sedan, screeched to a halt 20 feet away. The door opened. "Get in!" a voice shouted. Jacob hesitated. He didn't recognize the car. "Who is it?" Elena whispered. The driver leaned out. It was Rick, the nervous floor manager from the Onyx Lounge. He looked terrified, wearing a windbreaker over his pajamas. "Rick?" Elena gasped. "Marco called me before the line went dead," Rick stammered, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. "He said if anything happened, to check the back channel frequency. I tracked your phones. Jacob, boss, please get in before I wet myself." Jacob lowered the gun slowly. "Rick, the man who shakes when he pours wine." "Yeah, well, I'm shaking now too," Rick yelled. "Get in." They dove into the back seat. Rick floored it, tires spinning on the wet concrete as they sped down the tunnel. "Why are you helping us?" Jacob asked, eyeing the manager in the rearview mirror. "Silas pays better." "Silas threatened my sister last year," Rick said, his eyes glued to the dark road ahead. "You paid for her rehab. I keep my books balanced, boss." "I owe you." Elena looked at Jacob. For the first time, she saw surprise on his face. He had calculated loyalty based on fear and greed. He hadn't accounted for gratitude. It was a variable he had missed. "Where to?" Rick asked. "The financial district," Jacob said. "Jackson Boulevard." "And Rick?" "Yeah, boss. Drive like you stole it." As the car sped through the underground labyrinth, Jacob reached out and took Elena's hand. His grip was tight, possessive. "You're shaking," he noted. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alert." He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes changed. It wasn't just adrenaline anymore. "You were right about the transfer. If we freeze that money, we win. But we have to be precise. One wrong keystroke, and the feds get flagged." "I don't make math mistakes," Elena said, trying to summon her courage. "I know," Jacob said. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. It was a courtly, shocking gesture in the grime of the back seat. "That's why you're the queen on this chessboard, Elena. I'm just the knight doing the killing. You're the one who takes the king." The car swerved sharply, exiting the tunnel and bursting out onto the street level. The rain was torrential now. "We're here!" Rick shouted. "The Fed!" But as they looked at the massive stone fortress of the bank, Elena's heart sank. Standing on the steps, surrounded by black SUVs, was a small army. And in the center, holding an umbrella, was a tall, wiry man. Silas. He was waiting for them. "He knew," Elena whispered. "He did the math, too. He knew this was the only place with a terminal." Jacob checked his weapon. He had half a magazine left. "Rick," Jacob said calmly, "keep driving. Past the entrance, around the back." "What's the plan?" Rick screamed. "Plan B," Jacob said. He looked at Elena. "We aren't going to the terminal. We're going to the roof." "The roof? Why?" "Because." Jacob unlocked his door as the car skidded around the corner. "I can't stop the transfer with a keyboard anymore. I have to stop it by killing the man holding the authorization key. He looked at Elena one last time. Stay in the car. Keep your head down. If I don't come back in 10 minutes, Rick takes you to the airport. You fly to Zurich. There is an account there in your name with $5 million. I set it up an hour ago. Jacob, no. Elena grabbed his arm. It's just math, Elena. He smiled sadly. A life for a life. It balances. He kicked the door open and rolled out of the moving car into the rain. The rain was no longer just weather. It was a curtain, thick and suffocating. As Jacob rolled out of the moving car, Elena watched him disappear into the shadows of the alleyway behind the Federal Reserve. He moved like a phantom, his dark suit blending instantly with the wet brick. "We have to go, Miss Elena," Rick yelled, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He gave an order. "Zurich, $5 million." Elena looked at the back of Rick's head, then at the dark alley where the man who had pulled her out of obscurity had just walked to his death. She closed her eyes. Variables. Jacob was operating on a linear equation. Take out the threat. Save the girl. It was noble. It was romantic. And it was statistically doomed. Silas had the high ground, the numbers, and the element of surprise. The probability of Jacob surviving a frontal assault against 6 trained mercenaries was less than 3%. "Stop the car," Elena said. Her voice was ice. "What? No, I can't. I said stop the car!" Elena screamed, grabbing the emergency brake and yanking it up. The sedan skidded violently on the wet asphalt, fishtailing before slamming into a curb just 50 yards from the alley entrance. "You're going to get us killed!" Rick wailed. Elena ignored him. She stared at the building layout. The Federal Reserve wasn't just a bank. It was a fortress. But every fortress had a nervous system. She looked at the utility poles lining the street. A thick bundle of cables ran from a transformer box directly into the security outpost where Silas's men were likely staged. "Rick," Elena said, her mind working faster than it ever had at MIT. "Do you have jumper cables in the trunk?" "Yes, but get them." Elena kicked her door open. She didn't run away from the gunfire that had just started erupting in the alley. She ran toward the transformer box. Inside the alley, the world was exploding. Jacob was pinned behind a dumpster. Bullets chipped away at the masonry inches from his head. He fired 2 controlled shots, dropping one of Silas's men, but he was pinned. Silas's voice echoed from the loading dock above. "It's over, Jacob." Silas laughed, the sound distorted by the rain. "I admired you, you know. But you got soft. You let a waitress distract you from the bottom line." Jacob checked his magazine. 3 rounds left. He was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. He closed his eyes for a second, picturing Eleanor safely on a plane. Worth it, he thought. He prepared to stand up and take his final shot. Suddenly, the world turned white. A massive crack like a thunderclap detonated at the mouth of the alley. A shower of sparks, blue and angry, exploded from the transformer box, cascading down like a waterfall of fire. The streetlights blew out. The security lights on the loading dock surged and shattered. The electronic maglocks on the heavy steel gates short-circuited. For 3 seconds, everyone was blinded. Everyone except Elena. She had shut her eyes tight a second before she jammed the jumper cables into the exposed transformer leads, creating a catastrophic arc flash. In the confusion, the heavy automated gate to the loading dock, which had been locked, protecting Silas, failed. The magnetic seal died, and the gate groaned open, sliding heavily on its tracks. Jacob didn't hesitate. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew an opening when he saw one. He broke cover, sprinting through the darkness while Silas's men were still rubbing the spots from their eyes. He vaulted onto the loading dock. Silas was there, fumbling with his night vision goggles, which had just been overloaded by the flash. Jacob didn't use his gun. He tackled Silas, the momentum carrying them both through the open warehouse doors and onto the concrete floor of the sorting room. They rolled, fists connecting with bone. It was a brawl of primal hate. Silas was younger, faster, but Jacob fought with the weight of a man who had everything to lose. Silas managed to kick Jacob off. He scrambled for his dropped pistol, skittering across the floor. He grabbed it, rolling onto his back, aiming at Jacob's chest. "Goodbye, boss," Silas sneered. Click. Silas pulled the trigger again. Click. He stared at the gun in horror. The slide had failed to cycle. A stovepipe jam. A 1 in 1,000 probability for that model of firearm. Jacob stood up, panting, blood dripping from his nose. He adjusted his cufflinks, a reflex of his old life, even in the midst of violence. "You always forgot to clean the extractor spring, Silas," Jacob said, his voice ragged. "Small details. They kill you." Jacob raised his own weapon. He didn't hesitate. One shot. Silas slumped back, the ambition fading from his eyes as he stared up at the warehouse ceiling. Silence returned to the loading dock, save for the drumming of the rain. Jacob stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a searing pain in his shoulder. He turned toward the alley entrance. Elena was standing there. She was soaked to the bone, her uniform ruined, her face smudged with soot from the explosion. She was holding the jumper cables like a weapon. Jacob walked toward her. He didn't say a word. He closed the distance and wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her into him so hard it knocked the wind out of her. He buried his face in her wet hair. "You didn't go to Zurich," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I did the math," Elena sobbed, clutching the back of his torn suit. "The probability of me being happy without you was 0. Jacob pulled back, looking at her face. He wiped a smudge of grease from her cheek with his thumb. "Then we have a problem," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Because I'm never letting you leave now." 3 months later. The boardroom of the Vesper Syndicate was silent. It was a long table of polished ebony, seated with 12 of the most dangerous men in the Midwest. Capos, union heads, corrupt city officials. They were waiting. The double doors opened. Jacob walked in. He looked fully recovered, wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit his broad frame perfectly. He walked to the head of the table but didn't sit. He stood behind the chair, resting his hands on the leather. "Gentlemen," Jacob said, "we have had a profitable quarter. The acquisition of the Moretti territories is complete. Their assets have been liquidated and absorbed." A murmur of approval went around the table. "However," Jacob continued, his voice hardening, "there have been inefficiencies, leaks, sloppy accounting. That ends today." He gestured to the door. Elena walked in. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a cream-colored pencil skirt and a silk blouse, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She wore diamond studs in her ears, a gift from Jacob, and carried a tablet. She didn't look down. She looked every man at the table in the eye. "This is Elena," Jacob announced. "She is the new chief financial officer of this organization. Every dollar that comes in, every dollar that goes out, goes through her. If she flags an expense, you justify it. If she denies a request, it is denied." One of the older capos, a man named Vinny, scoffed. "With all due respect, boss. A girl? She looks like she should be bringing me an espresso, not auditing my books." The room went deadly silent. Jacob's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened on the chair. Elena didn't wait for Jacob to defend her. She walked calmly over to Vinny. She placed her tablet on the table in front of him. "Vincent Russo," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You run the waste management division. Last month, you claimed $40,000 in truck maintenance. Yet, according to the GPS logs of your fleet, 3 of your trucks haven't moved from the lot in 6 weeks. Vinny's face turned red. That's a glitch. "I checked the fuel receipts you submitted," Elena continued mercilessly. "They are time-stamped for a station in Gary, Indiana. But the credit card used belongs to a shell company registered to your mistress, Sophia. You aren't fixing trucks, Vinny. You're paying for a condo." Eleanor leaned down, her face inches from the terrified capo. "That is stealing from the family. Statistically speaking, people who steal from Jacob have a life expectancy of roughly 24 hours. Unless they pay it back with 20% interest by tomorrow morning." She straightened up and picked up her tablet. "Do we have an understanding?" Vinny looked at Jacob. Jacob just smiled, a proud, predatory smile. Yes, tomorrow morning," Vinny stammered. Elena nodded and walked to the other end of the table, taking the seat directly opposite Jacob. The Queen's seat. The meeting continued, but the dynamic had shifted. The men weren't just afraid of Jacob's muscle anymore. They were terrified of Eleanor's mind. She was the algorithm they couldn't cheat. Later that night, back at the spire, the city lights of Chicago glittered below them. The glass had been replaced, thicker this time. Eleanor stood by the window, a glass of wine in her hand. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You terrified Vinny," Jacob murmured. "I think he almost had a heart attack." "He's sloppy," Elena said, leaning back into him. "I don't like sloppy variables." "You've changed," Jacob noted softly. "I haven't changed," Elena corrected him, turning in his arms to face him. "I just found the right place to apply my skills. I was trying to solve equations in a world that didn't care. Now, I'm solving the world." Jacob looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You saved me, Elena. Not just in the alley. You saved me from becoming a machine. You gave me a reason to build something that lasts." "And what are we building, Jacob?" she asked. "A dynasty," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a ring, not a gaudy diamond, but a rare, blue, geometric sapphire, cut with mathematical perfection. "Marry me," Jacob said. "Be my partner, in everything." Elena looked at the ring, then at the man who had taken her from a sticky bar floor to the top of the world. She calculated the risks, the danger, the enemies they would face. But then she calculated the love, the loyalty, the power. The result was infinite. "Yes," Elena whispered. Jacob kissed her, and outside the city continued to turn, unaware that the most dangerous power couple in history had just sealed the deal. The waitress and the boss, the muscle and the math. It was the perfect equation. And that is the story of how a simple math correction changed the entire underworld of Chicago. From a waitress with a hidden genius to the queen pin of the Vesper Syndicate, Elena proved that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a sharp mind. If you enjoyed this twisty Mafia romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What did you think of Eleanor's transformation? Would you have stayed in the car, or would you have pulled the jumper cables? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a dark psychological thriller coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.